All right. Hey, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining another APIsec University webinar. Pleased to have you all here today, and as always, welcome you to say hi in the chat. Let us know where you're joining from. Guten Morgen, Murtada. Thank you for joining us. Hey, Scotty Bailey. So really excited for today's session with Kay from Ambassador Labs. It's a topic that I don't know enough about, and I'm really curious about, which is API gateways. Right? We talk a lot about API gateways as really being a key element of your API security strategy. And Kate has not only joined us today to talk about this topic, but she's also contributed a whole brand new course that we've launched on APIsec U this morning or evening, wherever you're joining us. And we're actually going to post that here. Hopefully you can see that. But if you want to check out the new course, there it is. And hopefully you'll enjoy that. So, Kay, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hello to everybody out in the world watching.
Yeah, we got a lot of people coming. Oh, look, we got Ukraine, Costa Rica, Nigeria, Florida, Canada, Portugal. So yeah, we've got a really great audience here. And as always, folks, we love your input. Chime in the chat with questions or thoughts or comments as we go along here. So let's just dive right into it. In the background here, we've just got our standard APIsec University site, which you're all very familiar with. And I just want to make sure you see that down here is our brand new course, API Gateway Security Best Practices. Learn about the role and best practices for API gateways from the one and only Kay James from Ambassador Labs. So with that, let's dive into the topic for today, right? So I'm going to start with the very basics, Kay, which is like, what is a gateway and what does it do and why should we care? Why should we be using one?
Yeah, so an API gateway, you could think of it as kind of an entry point, right? Access point for your APIs. Essentially, it becomes a central point for managing and controlling access to multiple APIs. And kind of in hand with the API security part of things. Here's where you can implement a lot of those security practices like authentication, rate limiting, maybe protocol translation, and those types of things, all in one place. So instead of um, putting that type of behavior in the actual code of your application, you could have that handled at a gateway and kind of decouple it from, say, like in a microservices architecture, you decouple it from the microservices and have it handled in one place. And then it becomes easier to manage and apply the same kind of configuration across multiple APIs just in one place.
Yeah, I mean, so like, do you see this journey that people typically take, like when they're pre-gateway and then they get to a point where they're like, yeah, we need a gateway? So what is, like, what does that look like? Like, what makes an organization realize, like, you know what, this is just a little too loosey-goosey and we should be thinking about getting more organized about this?
Yeah, I think what I commonly see is people shifting away from like kind of that monolithic architecture, and they're going towards that more containerized uh, microservices kind of thing. And then they're thinking about how do we manage, you know, applying the same configuration across these different microservices, across different APIs. How do you manage that instead of doing that at each individual one, especially as you start to scale and you have more and more APIs, more endpoints, more things to manage. It becomes annoying to have to, apply the same thing into 15, 20, 30, 40, hundreds of APIs, right? So when you're switching to a more microservices architecture, the gateway becomes really important, or simplifies that process of adding those security elements, adding those configurations across APIs. So instead of microservices having to manage and those same configurations, it's decoupled from them at the gateway level.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And so do you like see, like, I don't know, is there like a critical mass of APIs where, like, if you got one API, maybe you're not doing a gateway, but if you got 10 or 20 or 100, like, is there some point where you start to see this is really something you got to take seriously because it's getting out of control?
Um, It's hard to say that like he at 20, this is when you got to start looking at a gateway because I think like everybody's environment and their requirements is a little bit different. And I guess that plays a part into like which gateway do you pick.
Yeah.
It really depends on where you're coming from and where you're trying to go, and what requirements are part of that. Like what security elements are most important to you and your team. What are you guys missing currently or looking for exactly in terms of what you need the gateway to do for you? So
Yeah.
yeah, that for some people that could be 5 APIs.
Really.
For some, it's 20. For some, they already have 100, and
Yeah.
now they're looking at a gateway. So yeah, it's hard to say.
Well, so like, all right, there's an interesting question already here from Scott, right? So we're going to get into the security aspects. Isn't the gateway another attack slash misconfiguration vector, right? Like, can we get the gateway wrong and then actually create more vulnerability for us?
Possibly, but you could argue that for anything, right? Like,
True.
I think
True.
the idea of the gateway is kind of centralizing it to one place. So instead of having another um, point where things could go wrong, you're kind of consolidating it to like this is more than likely the point where it went wrong instead of saying we have 15 different places it could go wrong. So I
Yeah.
wouldn't say tomorrow pick up a gateway and then put this in production and just run with it. You definitely need to test and make sure that everything is up to par before you do that. But yeah, someone mentioned single point of failure in the chat, and that's kind of the goal, like a single point where you could look for instead of a bajillion.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe it is a single point of failure if you deploy it improperly, you put no authentication controls and no rate limiting and use none of the features properly of a gateway. But I think the alternative is lots of single points of failure, right? And like there's an example from big telco in Australia where an API got deployed, um, pushed onto the on into production, accessible to the outside world, and that API got discovered, and it had access to 10 million user accounts. Right? Someone found it, harvested it, and ransomed the company. Right? Like literally, went on the dark web and said, "We're going to sell, or we're going to post all these 10 million user accounts if you don't give us $1 million." And so, to me, like there's a much greater risk in not using a gateway, right? And maybe this is a question I was going to ask you later, but maybe we'll just go there, which is like, do you see like we talk a lot about governance, right? Like having standardized processes and common ways that we do things, the way we develop our APIs and publish them and operate them. Like, doesn't a gateway like assist or aid that governance aspect, which is like, we're not going to have rogue and random and shadow APIs out there because we're going to make sure everything goes into our standard centrally managed environment.
Yeah, definitely having the idea of centralization and that one place, that one standard, um, kind of takes away the variables there, and allows you to yeah, have that governance in one place, that one standard, and be able to deal with it and manage it in a uniform way. Definitely.
This is really amazing. Like, so we're getting like a flurry of questions. So we're gonna, we've definitely touched a nerve here on this topic. So we're gonna go in there real soon. But before we dive into all these really interesting questions, like let's talk a little bit. And let me pull the background off here. We don't need to look at this. Um, is like what is the like some of the core features of an API or of an API gateway, right? So you touched on them. So let's just go through them a little bit in more detail. And I know you cover this in the course itself, but so there's authentication and authorization. So maybe give us a little bit of like what is an API gateway providing in the way of authentication and authorization?
Yeah, so I think it'll vary depending on which gateway you go for, right? Some will have mechanisms to perform like OIDC based kind of authentication workflows. Some will have like really built in, I guess, like automations to handle these authentication, the authorization. Some will just kind of expose mechanism for you to implement your own flow for authentication and that type of thing. So it really will depend on which gateway you end up going with and what your need is, and uh, how much you and your team already have something for that. Like, I'm going to plug Ambassador's Edge Stack just because
Sure, go for it.
that's kind of my camp and my home. But like with Edge Stack, there is like built-in OAuth 2 workflows. There's JWT validation. But then there's also this concept of an external filter where you could have a custom service that performs some additional authentication that the built-in auth options may not cover. So yeah, and I'm sure that's the same across other different options out there too. So it, again, going back to the idea of the choices, you can kind of pick something that works best for you and your team and what you guys need to accomplish.
All right, so that's authentication. So another one of the big features of a gateway is rate limiting and maybe traffic shaping, traffic filtering in general. So what are some of the capabilities that you should be looking for in your gateway?
Yeah, so with rate limiting, you want to like prevent abuse, right? And you want to have like fair usage so your APIs don't get overloaded. So again, it's going to vary from gateway to gateway, but just some mechanism to in some capacity limit the number of requests that a given user can make in some time frame. I think is really important and a very useful feature when it comes to gateways.
Yeah, that's definitely on the rate limiting side, but there's also like traffic filtering. Can you do like, you know, control what traffic is permitted, what traffic is not? Maybe like, I don't know, based on IPs or geos or something like that.
Yeah. So again, with EdgeStack, I'll plug EdgeStack. So there's the option to kind of rate limit based on the source IP or the it's built on Envoy. So there's like this idea of clusters, destination and source cluster. You could rate limit based off a header value. You could rate limit based off of kind of anything. But
Yep.
to have that option, right, of specifying how you want to rate limit and how you want to enforce that rate limiting, I think
Yeah.
is really important. And another thing to consider when you're choosing a gateway, like, does this gateway support the method of rate limiting that we're trying to accomplish?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so there's some interesting conversation going on here. I'm trying my best to, you know, focus on our chat, but also pay attention here and some pretty interesting talk about like, well, isn't a gateway like, a single point of failure? Shouldn't gateways be used as a complement to centralized authorization? Is it good for governance and the like? And I guess the comment or the thought that's coming to my mind is like a gateway is not like the single element of security in your API stack, right? I mean, and then frankly, I think when I think about gateways, it's more of a management tool, right? That has security capabilities added, but it's not like you're done. You got a gateway, like you don't have to worry about security anymore. But it is this like critical. It's the gateway, right? It's where the rubber meets the road of APIs, right?
Mhm.
And it's where all the stuff that we publish and create actually gets out there into the outside world, right? And so you should use it for what it can do. But you need to complement it, right? Like I'm trying to find the comment in here about like WAF, like web app firewalling. Like a gateway is not a firewall, right? And we shouldn't consider it one, and we shouldn't expect it to be one. And it doesn't mean don't have a firewall. In fact, here's a comment from David. WAF isn't the end all be all either. They aren't good at discovery, posture management, can't really handle business logic attacks, right? So, I mean, I just want to make sure everyone sort of gets it. Like what we're talking about here is that element of your API stack that helps you centrally manage and deploy your APIs and set configurations and policies and the like. Am I getting that all right here? Like, am I framing the role of the gateway correctly here, in your opinion, Kay?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And that's why, like before I mentioned, it really will depend on your needs, like you and your team's needs, right? The gateway is definitely not the end all be all of security and whatnot. And yeah, you mentioned the WAF and things like that. Like a lot of API gateways don't have those WAF capabilities. So you should have, um, or you may need, right, some other tool to accomplish some of those other things alongside your gateway. Or maybe you're coming from somewhere where you don't have anything. So having the gateway to accomplish that management of the APIs, the maybe the authentication and the rate limiting and those types of things, and then you could supplement that with another tool that will provide that WAF or whatever other security features that the gateway you chose may not have.
Yeah.
Or say you have existing, you already have a WAF or something like that, and then like you mentioned, it doesn't accomplish everything when it comes to your API management. So then a gateway can help supplement and fill in those other features. So
Yep.
like I said, it really comes down to where are we coming from, what features do we need, and then picking a gateway that suits your needs in both the short term and the long term.
Well, and it fits right into a key element of what we talk a lot about at APIsec U is the three pillars of API security. And those three pillars are governance, testing, and monitoring, right? And so to me, a gateway fits very much in the governance side of things, right? It's basically like we as an organization are standardizing on how we are going to deploy APIs and where they're going to be hosted and managed and controlled and what policies and all of that kind of thing. We think you should really start with governance and define what those policies are and set standards, right? Like whenever I hear about rogue and shadow APIs, I'm thinking, you know, that shouldn't even be possible, right? There shouldn't be like a mechanism for a developer or anyone in the company to just stand up an API and put it out on the internet and make it available, right? There should be some standards. And to me, the gateway fits very well into that initiative, right? Um, which is to say that we're making a decision as a company that all our APIs get hosted, managed in a central, standardized way, right? So there's governance, right? On the other side, monitoring, right? So we see a lot of chats about web app firewalling. To me, that's on the monitoring side, right? And yes, I think API gateways are in line, right? They're watching the live traffic. It is a control point, right? And it can do certain things, like you said. It can do authentication, it can do rate limiting, it can do traffic filtering, geo IP, whatever it is, right? But but you've got things like web app firewalls and so forth that can do additional things, right, beyond what you would expect from a gateway. And then the third element is the testing side, right, which is a whole different beast altogether. Which is how do you ensure that your APIs are free of vulnerabilities and exploits and authorization gaps and so forth. So to me, that's kind of where this all fits. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to look at some of the questions. How many layers does WAF have? Like how many security you need to apply to ensure there's no vulnerability or low severity? Well, that's a great big question there, Denver. I mean, I think there's a lot to it, and I mean, there's multiple layers of vulnerabilities potentially, right? But again, like what we're talking about here with the gateway is, how are we setting our policies and making sure that the gateway is properly configured. So let's go back, if you don't mind, Kay, to the course that you've created and generously contributed to the APIsec U community. So what can we expect in the course? Like what are you covering in there, and what should people expect to learn from it?
So we definitely, or I, I touch on kind of the concept of API gateways, and then large part of it is talking about like security and how API gateways can assist in that. So yeah, we touch on authentication, obviously rate limiting, and I do mention like monitoring as well, um, which falls back into what we were just talking about like the gateway can't do everything, but a good gateway is going to have some method for you to do some monitoring, and then you can integrate with your actual monitoring tools to do that. So we talk about that. I touch on some of the different gateways that are out there, and on the idea of choosing one that's best for you, and taking a look at the different options that are out there. I think it's really important when you're considering gateways to really weigh your options and take your time to choose one that works best for you and your needs. Because there are a lot of options out there, and you may not need like 10,000 features, or you may need 10,000 features. Like it really depends where you're coming from, where you're going,
Yeah.
short term, the long term goals, and which security elements are most important to you and your team. So that's the gist of the course.
Yeah, and I invite folks to check it out. It's another free course on our website. It's got a certificate and a badge, so you can go ahead and earn those. In fact, we already have some people who've already completed the course, so it's there for everyone to take advantage of. So let's look at some more questions. All right. Can API Gateway provide complete visibility to all API endpoints? This is actually a question I have in my mind too. Thank you, Mohammed Tala. Um, like, if you're properly managing and, getting all of the APIs that exist in your organization hosted or managed in the API Gateway, is in fact that gateway a source of truth for discovery or inventory of all your APIs and all the endpoints that exist?
It should be. If if everything is going through that gateway, and there a good gateway, I think, would have some means for you to monitor that and to have that visibility into all of your endpoints, to everything that's existing. Um, yeah, it should be easy to find, all the endpoints that you have exposed, all the services, and that type of thing. So I would say, yeah, that should be the goal of your gateway too, is to have something that's central and easy to find everything about what you have, those APIs that you have exposed through it.
Yeah, indeed, and I mean, as you said, it should be right, and I guess the caveat is that your organization has defined a policy that says all APIs get hosted or managed in the gateway, and that there isn't a workaround or an end around. I mean, obviously, if someone's able to stand something up outside the gateway, then you're not going to know about it. So that's why I think it's just so critical that those governance standards get defined and enforced, right?
Yeah.
Like that there is not some rogue way to get things um, out there on the internet. All right, from Tina Tenda, my question is: do we still need to employ API level authentication and authorization, or the gateway is just our single point of security? What are your thoughts on that topic?
I'd say ideally, right, you'd have it all at the gateway so that you could take it away from the actual APIs to handle it, and it's just at the gateway. Um, However, I think there may be cases or unique instances where maybe you're migrating from some legacy, something like that, and you couldn't let go of whatever the actual API itself is handling. So in that case, I could see that being the situation. But ideally, right, you'd want to have it at the gateway. So there's just one point to look at to manage that and to handle authentication, and that will just make your life easier too as you keep building and whatever. It's taken away from the actual APIs to manage, and uh, I think that also takes away like the kind of debt of um, oh, some developer A made this for this API how many years ago, and now he's gone, and you know
Yeah.
that type of thing. So if it's at the gateway and everybody can figure out how to use this gateway, then it takes away the having to learn some old developers code that they didn't comment well or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we need to treat APIs as products, right, and not just this like random byproduct of the code we write and the applications we develop. Like, they are products in their own right, and they should be treated as such, right? From Mirek, isn't the gateway just a small obstacle for attackers, which can find a way around it, similar as a firewall can't protect against everything? Um, Curious your take on that. I mean, yeah, there's no like silver bullet. Like, I think I've seen other people talk about defense in depth. There's got to be multiple layers, but I don't know. Any thoughts or comments there, Kay?
Um, I feel like there's always going to be some kind of risk. Like there's no perfect, golden solution in the world.
Yeah, yeah,
But ideally, right, if you're picking a solution that's best for you and your team, um, you're thinking about avoiding those things or prioritizing the best protection, right, for your systems. So hopefully what you choose ends up not being something that is, so easily penetrable, and what you deploy is not, you know, or whatever ends up being in production and accessible is not so easily breakable.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I would expect with most of the major gateways that exist out there that, no one's going to try to sell you something that is going to break within 2 knocks, so
No, indeed, and maybe and we're seeing a lot of this theme in the chat, right? Like, what can I rely on the gateway from a security perspective, and what do I need to complement with other capabilities? And I guess it's almost like we're starting this conversation from a standpoint of gateways are security tools, and I'm not sure that's. I mean, when I think of a gateway, it's more of a management layer, right? That has security included. Do you agree with that?
yeah, I would say so. I wouldn't say that the gateway is meant to be your end all be all of security when it comes to your APIs. It definitely will need something else alongside it to really make it the
Sure.
strongest thing it could be.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And so like the like you opened up with like why do people deploy gateways? Well, it's about scale and manageability and consistency, right? Like, if we've got all these in one place, right? We can define our policies, we can control authentication, we can actually monitor, right? We can pull the logs, we can understand what's happening. And that's really all from a management perspective, but it bleeds over into security somewhat, right? Because you are doing authentication at the gateway. You can do rate limiting things at the gateway. You can filter traffic at the gateway. But like here, Jeff, he has an interesting question. Should gateways be used primarily as governance, or should we start using gateways like WAFs and web application protection and API protection? Too many customers have been misled to believe their gateways are security enforcement. What's your reaction to that comment?
I would say that if a gateway was meant to replace WAFs, then they would just be called WAFs, right? Um, or maybe like a WAF
Exactly.
plus thing. So yeah, I don't think that gateways are meant to replace those existing security mechanisms. I really think they're meant to be coupled together. There are some that like you could think of the gateway and its security capabilities as like supplementing or augmenting or just another layer, right, of security for something like a WAF or those types of tools. But it's definitely not meant to replace it, because if it was, it wouldn't be called a gateway or something different. They definitely
Yeah.
have their unique capabilities and features, and even across different gateways, right? They don't all do the same thing. So you can't expect any gateway that you pick to just replace whatever you have, or to be the end all be all. And that's why I keep saying, like, you really need to assess what features you're looking for, what you guys already have and what you need, to make the decision of which gateway will best suit your needs. Because like you said, at the end of the day, it's a management tool for your APIs and that type of thing, but it's definitely not the end all be all of security, and not the replacement for
Yeah.
the security tools you have.
Yeah. No, not at all, right? And I think it's important for people to realize, right? Like, the function here is to help you manage the APIs. But you should be taking advantage of the security capabilities that the gateway offers, right? And I think that's what you're covering in the course in much more depth. Interesting question again from Scott. Does the gateway work more efficiently in the cloud versus on-prem? Um, it's a good question. Like, are people moving their gateways into the cloud? Or probably they have been for some time. Then,
Uh yes. I think some people may have stronger opinions about that, but again, I think this really depends on your needs, your environment, your requirements, and what you've got going on. You know, and with Edge Stack, that is deployed in your cluster. That's basically on prem, right? But that's a decision that we make, or we think is best. Some other gateway may decide that the way they handle it in the cloud might be better. Um,
Got it.
yeah, I can't say like on-prem is better. It really depends on your needs and what's
Sure.
working best for your team.
Well, it looks like Miguel made exactly that point. On-prem gateway versus cloud depends on your workload, how they're maintained and deployed, and so forth. So I think, but the point is, like, you've got your choices out there, right? There's different approaches to your gateway. I know we're hitting the half hour, so I just want to like throw a few calls to action for folks. So we have the course up there. We're also doing here's a couple of little plugs. We're actually running a market survey right now. So we're actually, if you have 5 minutes or so, we'd love for folks to check out, answer like 10, 12 questions about API security market, and gateways are among the questions that we're asking. Like, what sort of technologies are you using, and what sort of risks are you finding most challenging, and so on and so forth. So we're taking the feedback that we're getting from this market survey, and we're going to create a comprehensive report. So we'll publish that here shortly. If you're amenable to it, definitely love to get your feedback. Giveaway time, APIsec. We gave away a boatload of CASA certified API professional analyst exams this week, and maybe we'll give some more out. Why not? How do we reach you guys? From Calvin. Yeah, that's a great question. So, and maybe we can post that into the chat here. Scott, yes, more CASA. Okay, we're making a decision. All right, for everyone that signs up for the course or fills out our survey, we're going to give away 10 more CASA exams. How about that? So thank you for being great members of our community, and enjoying Kay's course here. Kay, how can people reach you or reach Ambassador Labs? What's the best way to learn more?
I'm on LinkedIn. I should share my link somewhere somehow. But definitely
Well,
there.
like, you can count on Bailey. Here you go.
Yeah.
Getambassador.io. There you go. Thank you, Bailey. If there's any contact info, please post it in there as well. And yes to everybody. How hard is the ASCP Denver? So that's our API security certified professional exam. It's pretty hard. I'm not going to lie. People, we have about a 50% pass rate on the first try. You get multiple tries. Definitely do our pen test course really, really thoroughly before you try ASCP. For our CASA exam, definitely take our OWASP course, and learn all about that. Oh, look, there's we got your email in there as well. You can thank Bailey for all the emails you're about to get. Okay. So thank you,
Yeah.
everyone. Look, we got 98 clicks. And another little quick plug before we get back to the questions. Our very next webinar is going to be super fun. So that's in about 2 weeks' time. And we're talking about governance. So this has been really relevant here in the conversation today. So we're actually going to have Iona Preci from FreeNow. It's kind of the European Uber, who is an expert on governance. So definitely come check out our webinar in 2 weeks. But let's get back to some of the questions. All right, so Lily, APIs are products. Besides APIsec, what guidance do you have for upscaling API technical product managers who holistically own the program? Is cybersecurity degree becoming a requirement? I know this is kind of off topic for you, Kay, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on this question.
Upskilling.
Like, how can we namely, is a cybersecurity degree like a requirement for API product owners and developers? Like, Do you need to have security chops to be good at developing APIs?
I mean, I wouldn't say a degree is always a requirement. If you have experience or you've if you could somehow prove that you know what you're talking about, that can take you pretty far. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yep.
that would probably be my answer, but it doesn't hurt also, to actually get a degree and to really know what you're talking about and that type of thing. So
Yeah, no, for sure. Definitely doesn't hurt. I don't think it's a requirement either. I think the main thing is that we get more awareness out there. And so, one of the things, in fact, and I'll pop our website back up. Is We really believe that we should make sure all the stakeholders are familiar with the risks and best practices of APIs, right? And let me refresh this real quick. All right, good. So right here at the top of our page, you can actually see the new webinars there. But we also have this thing called a live workshop, and basically, this is our way to try to spread more education and knowledge about API security risks. And I think the main point here is that you want to make sure the people that are developing and defining your APIs understand API risks, right? They don't have to have security degrees or anything like that. That seems like overkill. But understanding how attackers are targeting your APIs and how they are successfully breaching, right? A lot of times it's weak authentication, right? Or broken authentication, or no authentication, right? Like, things you could fix at the gateway level, right? Or it's logic attacks, or it's authorization flaws where Dan can access K's records, right? Like, these are the kinds of things that your API developers need to understand. And you don't need to have a degree to understand it. You need to have awareness, right? Developers have a lot of pressure to push out code and fixes and new features, right? That's where money gets made, right? And all that functionality. Security isn't always top of mind, so I think one of the key things is really just to make that security knowledge available to folks. They don't need to have the degrees. They just need to be able to understand, how our API is at risk and what can we do to keep them better secured. All right, what do we got here? Is there a documented API vetting and publishing process? Like, which APIs are subject to legal and regulatory compliance? How do you monitor for vulnerabilities? Well, I want to talk about that first one from Denver. Is there a documented API vetting and publishing process? Like, for APIs to get into the gateway, right? Okay, like you'd want to know that they've gone through some sort of assessment, right? So I know this is outside of the responsibility of the gateway, but do you see from your clients a like a policy, a process, like a testing regimen of what it takes to earn the right to get into the gateway?
yeah, I'd say again, it varies from people to people, but there's definitely some kind of means within a team, right? To ensure that they usually have something, right, thought out for that process.
Mhm.
Definitely outside the means of what the gateway would handle, but it's definitely something
Yeah.
that there should be something like that. I don't know if there's like a standard for that across, everybody in the world, but definitely within a team they should have something, some kind of process for that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it goes back, I think, to that governance, right? Which is like, API should get documented. You should have your own style guides defined for your organization, like, you know, time zones and currencies and units and naming conventions and authentication policies and all that kind of stuff. There are linting tools out there that will actually analyze your documentation and see if it's up to spec, or if it's missing elements, right? So those are things that you should do ahead of putting anything live into the gateway. Which APIs are subject to legal and regulatory compliance? I think that needs to be thought of way up front, right? Like, as you are defining the objective and purpose of an API, like thinking about, is this or is this API going to touch, healthcare data, right? Is there privacy concerns with this API? And that should govern things like your authentication requirements and your authorization rules and monitoring and all of these kinds of things, right? How do we monitor for vulnerabilities in your APIs? Well, Denver, I mean, I think this is where those, the testing and monitoring aspects of the three pillars come in. I mean, monitoring for APIs, we really strongly believe in something more proactive, which is to say, like, you know, pressure test your APIs as part of the release cycle, right? Not just for functionality, like does it work properly, but does it not work improperly, right? Are there ways to exploit things in your API, business logic flaws, or accessing records that don't belong to you, or um, harvesting, right? Like, do you use incremental IDs, right, that make it really easy for someone to iterate through your API and harvest data, right? And then on the monitoring side, like, are you actually employing rate limiting and filtering and these kinds of things to look for abuse or injections and so forth? So um, there are lots of technologies out there that can help you with that. Come talk to me and we can tell you more about it. But I don't think anything should get into the gateway without having gone through a vetting process. And I don't think, okay, that's too controversial of a statement. Do you think?
Yeah, I agree.
All right, what else we got here? And I know we're going to wrap up here in just a second. Um, what do we got? How will open banking and PSD2 change the demand for API security professionals? Yeah, I think it's going to change a ton. So PSD2 is basically the banking interoperability. We see the same thing in healthcare, right? So there's interoperability for healthcare. Every SaaS vendor is basically built on APIs. I mean, we all know APIs are powering the world, right? And so hopefully, for folks like Ambassador Labs and all the providers of API technologies, that's great for business. But there's a reason why these technologies exist, right? And so hopefully that is translating into great opportunities for API professionals, and certainly from a security perspective. And thank you, Scott, for the kind words. Well, I think we should start wrapping up here. Yes, there will be a recording of this session. We will email it out to you within the next 24 hours. Again, please come and check out the new course from Kay. It's available now, and it's right here on our website. You can learn all about the best practice for securing your gateways. We never get through all of the questions, but I promise you we look at all of them. So, Christine, my colleague, who's lurking here in the background and helping make APIsec University everything that it can be, we look at all your questions and we'll follow up with you individually as best that we can. Thanks for joining us as always. Please register for our next webinar and contribute your input to our survey. And big thank you to you, Kay. Thanks for being with us here this morning and for sharing all your expertise in the course. We really, truly appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and that wraps up another APIsec U conference. And thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you again in 2 weeks. Take care, everybody.